Estimados colegas, estudiantes, amigos, soy Manuel Cuadra. Los saludo desde la Facultad de Arquitectura y Urbanismo de la Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú y la Facultad de Arquitectura, Urbanismo y Artes de la Universidad Nacional de Ingeniería en Lima. Damos inicio a una nueva sesión en el ciclo de conferencias Arquitectura, Paisajismo y Urbanismo Contemporáneos. Contamos hoy con un invitado especial, el colega crítico de la arquitectura irlandés, Shane O'Toole, quien se nos sumará en la conversación luego de la conferencia. Nuestras conferencistas de hoy son Ivonne Farrel y Shelley McNamara, arquitectas por la University College Dublín, Irlanda, fundadoras de GRAFTON Architects, 1978 en Dublín, profesoras de la School of Architecture at University College Dublín, EPFL Lausanne, GSD Harvard University, Yale University y actualmente de la Academia de Arquitectura Mendrisio, Suiza. Curadoras de Free Space, la Bienal de Arquitectura de Venecia 2018. La obra de GRAFTON Architects es tema de numerosas exposiciones y publicaciones y ha merecido numerosos premios y honores irlandeses, europeos y globales, y ante todo el Pritzker Prize del año 2020. La conferencia de Ivonne Farrel y Shelley McNamara lleva el título Place, Education and Ethos, de UTEC Campus en Lima. Dear Ivonne and Shelley, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for your kind words. It's a pleasure for Shelley and myself to present samples of our work to you. And we really appreciate your questions that you sent to us. I'll just share the screen and I'll just begin with what fascinated us, I think, which was really important, was when you asked us to speak, which we named Place, Education and Ethos. You also had questions which we have in the subtitle. How does the actual location on the earth, its contemporary and historic cultural heritage, combine to be inspirations and aspirations in projects? It's a general thing. So we'll begin. So both Shelley and I will speak. We'll speak to some slides and then we'll change and we'll come back. So we try to put together some of our work to make the points to describe our value system. So we'll start our, when we say place and education and ethos, the location on the earth is unique where we all live. We're on this planet in the universe, this fragile and strong planet, and every place is unique. And education is an incredible gift to humanity, and it transforms the way we think and how we can be useful to society. And ethos is also the value system of each organization or each building, or what is the philosophy that holds a building together. So our first slide, which is a very important description of, if I look here to say where you can see my pointer, I hope, in terms, this is an isothermic chart. This is a map which describes the various bands of climate between where we are in Ireland, this little piece. I hope you can see my pointer. So in the middle of the screen, surrounded in black, is the island of Ireland in the Atlantic Ocean. And further down here, where you are, which is Peru, which is facing the Pacific Ocean. So we both face west. We both share different oceans, but we are also in different climatic regions. And also with the changing climate of the Earth, at the moment we're in a line between the temperate climate, and we are affected by what's called there's a current which comes across, a warm current which touches our shores and makes us warmer than we technically should be, because we're the same as Newfoundland, so we should be colder, but the current warms us up, and you are in the if you like, the equatorial region. So we are similar and we are different. But for us, and the discussion today about place, that it's also about the future of sustainability and how buildings respond. The first project, which I will show, is one that we finished recently. It's in the City of London. So on the bottom of this image here is the River Thames down below in that image. And then you also have the buildings around. These are the law courts, this part of the City of London. And we won a competition for a new university building that was on a site 55 meters facing onto a very ancient public space or open space in the City of London called Lincoln's Inn Fields. And across the way from us was a very important architectural building. It's the John Soane Museum, which is a museum which is free to the public under Act of Parliament by Sir John Soane in his time. The house is now, if you like, a sample of his kind of architecture. So we were very aware that we were building a building with 55 meters, part of the whole enclosure of this public space. It was a competition, as I said, and when we talk about place and education and ethos, in terms of place, and each project is also trying to find some sort of kernel that anchors a project in its location, in its place, so that each place magnifies the beauty of its difference. And in this drawing over here on the right-hand side, you see this it's a little chapel. And Shelley normally describes this beautiful building. There's a photograph of it here. You're in the undercroft of the structure. So this was, if you like, a free space, an open space underneath the public space, where the chapel was a separate entrance and open up above this space. And what is fascinating about this is that the structure of the room above, the chapel, the space, becomes, if you like, a semi-public space open to the public. The drawing here is a drawing we did in our office, where the 55 frontage meter of the new building forms part of the southern elevation of this space. So this is our drawing of that building, that building, that building as you move along, making the case for this new educational institution. And because we were, so this drawing on the section is facing to the north into Lincoln's Inn Fields. The brief was for, on the left-hand side, lots of research offices in the blue here, in teaching spaces in the tan here, sports space, a large sports hall and many other sports facilities. And what we did was that we separated what was needed. We pushed the teaching spaces up and the research spaces up, and the research institute on the roof. We put the big sports rooms down below ground, bringing light down to them, and we liberated this space, the free space underneath, like the underside of Lincoln's Inn's, the little chapel that we made. This is the structure that holds the building above, and you move actually in the structure. So here you're on Lincoln's Inn Fields. The ground is sloping slightly, going down to the River Thames, down to the south. And we made this public space where you move up through the building in terms of the research offices up to the roofscape. And down below is the big sports hall. And in terms of the relationship between architecture and structure, which we will talk about throughout this afternoon, that the other part of architecture and the twinning of architecture with structure is really a spatial twinning, a spatial dance. So here in the red, we have the large scale structure, which is this here. It then twists for the smaller scale and moves up for the smaller again, like a tree. So the smaller office spaces take smaller structure. So there's 3 different kinds of structure in the building. Here we have the facade, which is the 55 meters of elevation to Lincoln's Inn Fields, the main entrance, the free space, the teaching rooms here, the research offices up above. And one thing that's really important in this case, because the facade was facing north and because the sun is from the south, we didn't want to have a very dark, shadowy main elevation. So we made this like a lantern so that the south light could come through and shine through into the northern space. You're down in the opposite. We have our sun to the south. You have your sun more or less to the north. And also where we're using these fins to catch the western sun, to bounce light as deep into the plan. And the second image is one of the other entrances that links into the streetscape of London. And here on the right-hand side, you're in the free space, the new space that was invented in terms of pushing the need up higher, the need down below, and we make a space which is multifunctional. This is both an area for students to gather. It's a place where exhibitions are held. It's a place for lectures, but it has this multifunctional possibility within its repeated structure. And as you come in as a student, you then wind up this generous staircase up to the teaching rooms, 2 levels of them above your head. So you can either contain yourself on this level and move from street to street, or move up within the, if you like, the forces of gravity of the structure. And here is an image of that same space. Sometimes it's where students, the furniture allows the students to meet each other and do some study. And then we have these intimate spaces, which we call the little Bramante seats. They're very small scale, 1 or 2 people just allowed into or fit in these design spaces where students can do their work and be part of a bigger space, but intimately separate. Or it can be opened up for a lecture, in this case here, or another image further down below. And I'll finish and hand over to Shelley in a minute with this one, because these, I said in the beginning that across the space was John Soane's museum, which is, he was an architect, practicing architect, but he also was a teacher of architecture. And this house has these incredibly beautiful and intimate spaces as you move up through to the building. And this was a photographic section, which we thought was really very beautiful. And it was at a time in London at the time, the pollution was so dreadful that people could hardly see, you know, more than say 10 or 15 meters. The amount of pollution from smoke, from domestic fires, from businesses within the city really made the city a dreadful place to breathe. And one of the things that was interesting about John Soane, he was a very good friend of the painter Turner. And just that friendship, maybe in terms of the yellow color that he used to brighten up the gloom of London at that time. But what we loved about this section, about the roof lights, because Soane was a master of light, and we were invited to do an exhibition in the Soane Museum. And one of the things that was interesting was that we did an exhibition called Neighbors in Space and Time. And we connected our drawings with what had been done in the 1800s with Soane, late 1700s and 1800s. And we made the sectional cloud section of our LSE building. So here you have on the right-hand side, the space down below, the slope down towards the river. You have the staircase that moves up. You have the 2 stories of teaching, and you have the structure with the void moving up and bringing light down from the upper levels. So we thought we would share with you this. It's an interesting technique in terms of the cloud section. Shell?
This next project, the Anthony Timberland Center in Arkansas, is our first totally timber building. It's quite difficult to build in timber in Ireland for many complex reasons. And this was a competition we won again for another university. And it's a fantastic idea which the university had, which is to make a building which would reinvigorate the timber industry in this area, because the area of Arkansas and Fayetteville is full of forests. And they wanted to make a building which would somehow act as a catalyst for the local industry. And because it's part of the University of Arkansas, that it would also be a teaching tool for their schools of engineering and architecture, which they teach. And in the bottom left-hand image is a building we discovered by the architect Faye Jones. And we have to admit, we didn't know about this architect or about this wonderful thorn crown chapel, the bottom left image. And it's something we were really inspired by for a number of reasons. Not least because of its beauty, but also because it's built in the middle of a forest, and it's a large space made with small timber elements. The elements had to be light enough for 2 men to carry through the woods, and it feels like a really light kind of lattice work. It looks like it's an outdoor pavilion, but actually it's indoor. And this building was also inspired by Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, which one would not expect, that somehow this architect was influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, but also by Sainte-Chapelle. And I suppose the bottom image beside it of the 2 people besides the trunk of the tree is a reminder of how we as architects use resources and how we need to respect these resources. And trees are living things which are cut down and reused, and we need to use them with respect. The white model describes a wish, which I suppose in all of our projects, we try to bring the different activities of a building together, especially in educational buildings. And we have, the university wanted to make a tall building facing the public thoroughfare of the city, and at the same time wanted a working floor, a shop floor where they would make and use timber and work the timber. So we made this shed, which is a kind of dancing shed, which climbs up over the tall teaching spaces and faces primarily north because of the severity of the sun and the heat in Arkansas. Next image.
Sorry, Shell.
Yeah. And looking at how this has developed and become more simplified, on the thing of the dancing roof up to the taller teaching spaces overlooking one of the main streets, roads in Fayetteville on the right-hand side. Ivonne, you might point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
And there's a sunken workshop which can be seen from the street. And it's this big open workshop with heavy machinery and big spans. And,
oh, sorry.
And then the roof comes to a very tight point up above in relation to the teaching spaces, but we felt this crack of space was really important. Sometimes it's really interesting even to have a small crack of space where a student can look down and see the floor, the active floor of the joinery, let's call it. What's also interesting is on the floor above the double height working yard towards the street is the auditorium. And they wanted this auditorium to be central to the kind of life of the building. So we had to think about a way of supporting that in a way which wouldn't obstruct the machinery down below. There's lifting cranes and big machines. Next image. And the fantastic thing about working with timber, it's so different to working with concrete frame or monolithic concrete structures, is that you really see the structure, how all the elements, it's like the skin is removed and you see all the bones and the workings of the forces. And the section on the right-hand side shows one of the principles of these big totem poles of columns, which reach right up from the ground to the upper level. And then in order to hang the auditorium and get it to float above the big working yard, we used the good old-fashioned queen post truss, which would allow us to do this, to place the auditorium within view of the noisy working yard, and at the same time not obstruct the activities down below. And when you see the north lights, the big columns reducing in size as you move up, and we're really enjoying this project. Next image. And then the how you make a timber building deal with all the fire codes in Fayetteville. There was a steep learning curve for us because the codes are different in every country, and there were certain points above which we could not use exposed timber and where we changed to metal. And this was the case both internally and externally. What you see here is, again, the workshop climbing up over the teaching spaces and making a civic edge onto the public space of the city, and that the citizens and the visitors can see into this work, this kind of manual work. And we'll come to it in Lima. It's something we learned from the UTEC project in Lima, the joy of seeing the nitty-gritty of a university when it's related to making. And one of the really important things educationally about this brief was the wish for the university to place a space of making and craft in the middle as a central educational tool, because one of the things about many universities is they're becoming more and more academic and more detached from the mess of making, let's say. Next image. And then in relation to Toulouse, which Ivonne referred to, no, maybe you didn't refer to, Toulouse is this extraordinary city in the middle south of France, a red brick city, a World Heritage elements within the city. The left-hand side plan shows a medieval wall, which heads its way towards the huge Garonne River and the Midi Canal, which joins this river. And we're at a place where the old Roman city joins what we call the new city. And there's a fantastic density about the old city of Toulouse with tiny, tiny urban blocks. And the bottom middle image shows the way that these blocks work is the biggest window, let's say, is to the sky. And that was something we really enjoyed, to think about how we could make a dense building where the sky is brought into play as one of the windows. And it has this heroic thing, these big buttresses, timber buttresses for the churches, the big bridges, and the thing of brick, just using brick. Next image. And what we found, again, in terms of the program, which is not unlike the University of the London School of Economics, where there are lecture theatres and graduate and postgraduate offices, and then research offices and professors' offices up above. But one of the things we found here was that the lower levels are a kind of perimeter plan wrapped around a central circulation space. And then as we move up, there's a certain metamorphosis that happens where the building comes free. And our building contractor called this building the Butterfly, which we thought was really interesting because it has the butterfly has a similar kind of metamorphosis. We didn't really realize we were doing it at the time. It was the program, a very dense site, again, how to make a sense of space within a dense site. And also one of the important things which we'll be speaking about in relation to UTEC is the thing of climate and how climate informs a project. And here in this project, Ivonne could point on the plans, we have 6 fire escape stairs which form the kind of feet or the sturdy base, the kind of footprint of the building. And that was a way of us making surface at a scale which somehow connected with the buttresses of the church, but also staked out the territory behind which we could occupy, where the university could occupy. So these, let's call them footprints, also allow the escape happening to the edge, which means the middle can be free. And you see that in the section, whereas it's very thin edges, the top left section, just have the sky cloister, which connects the offices up above, and it gets more and more dense as you come down. And then on the right-hand side, there's a very dense part of the building. So the DNA of the building changes as you move through the project. Next image. And the climate in Toulouse is it's very, very hot in the summertime and not so cold in the winter. It has a lot of wind. It needed to be protected from wind and rain. But as we learned from the building in Milan in the early 2000s, we found that it was possible to make, let's say, collective space within the world of a university, to make it not inside, not outside, but tempered space, which is comfortable space. And that's something where people say you can't do that in Ireland, but we don't believe that, because many of our monasteries in Ireland are a fantastic example of what a place of education can be, where you make a cloister around a garden and the ceiling is the sky and you're protected from wind and rain. And it's such a beautiful place to be, that space between inside and outside. And here we have this need to, or wish to, choreograph the beauty of the city, that these big openings that we make with the sky cloister up above and terraces down below would make windows at the scale of the city, so that the students can ponder over the questions to hand, but also are absorbing what's happening in their city. And the right-hand image shows really a kind of collage of elements we found in Toulouse, the big buttresses, which are the fire stairs, the colonnades and cloisters, which we found in the city, the sky cloister, which traps the triangular view of the sky as you enter. So this was really coming out of a response to this beautiful red brick city. Next image. So, another image. And we needed courage to actually take our place beside this beautiful Roman, this beautiful medieval wall. And we wondered what should we do? Should we stand back? Should we stay away? And we decided to come as close as was absolutely possible. But we've used the same brick. And we found this brick, exactly the same earth, exactly the same dimensions. This brickyard about 1 hour from Toulouse. And they have this beautiful yellowish, soft colored mortar, which we used. We found that in Toulouse and perhaps in parts of Paris, our engineers hadn't built a solid brick wall in a very long time. And there were codes which we needed to engineer these walls in a way which would meet the current codes, but would still have the quality of the medieval wall. And the image on the right just shows this big window to the Quran from within the world of the university. Next image. Moving to UTEC, And I think this project started in 2011. And one of the questions we found very moving, actually, in your email, Manuel, was you said, we were particularly interested in your Peruvian work, based, we imagine, on an approach to Peru, on ideas of what Peru is and what Lima is, on what architecture should be in Peru and for Peruvians here in Lima. In that sense, we are interested in learning about you, and through you about us, or at least about how we can be seen architecturally, urbanistically, and in terms of landscape. I'm not sure we can answer those very important questions, but what we can say is that our experience in Lima has been one of the most liberating, refreshing experiences in our architectural lives. We found that you're great builders, and obviously from a hugely rich cultural and physical tradition. And in Lima, in Peru, we found a client who gave us the scope, who supported architecture, who trusted the architectural jury, and gave us the opportunity to make, I suppose, looking back on it, Ivonne and I were just looking at it yesterday, preparing for this lecture. We don't know any other place or any other country where somebody would make the opportunity for an architect to make a building like this. And you know, that in itself is a reflection of the let's say the cultural and our architectural tradition in Peru as we found it. This image is again describing a city the like of which we've never experienced before. A desert city which should have a really hot climate, but has a moderate climate because of the Alexander von Humboldt current from the Antarctic, which cools the temperature of the city, a bit like Ivonne describing the way that the similar current warms the country of Ireland. And the connection between the city and the Pacific we found extraordinary. Next image. We had never seen a city where there's a 40-meter cliff continuously separating the city from the sea. And we realized that the motorway at the low level is relatively new. And when we were there, we also realized that when you're down at the low level, and because of the fog, of the cold and the warm currents meeting, and the fog descends on the city, that the city actually disappears. And it's a kind of surreal thing that it disappears and reappears. Next image. And this fog, I mean, we've built in Milan, and the fog in Milan is amazing where the city disappears. But it's different type of fog, because in Lima, the fog is like liquid light or something, and it hurts your eyes because it refracts the light within the droplets of water. It seems to refract the light and intensify the light. So there was the physical kind of experience of the climate, which was so extraordinary, and the physical experience of the city, which we have to admit we did not experience personally until after we'd won the competition. But one of the architects in our office had lived in Lima for some time, and she was describing the nature of Lima and its relationship to the landscape and its relationship to the sea. So these cliffs and this fog were central to our thinking in making the proposition. Next image. and also the fingers of green space that connect. This is one of the few fingers which connect the Pacific to the city. And the banana-shaped site, Ivonne might point to it, the banana-shaped site on this green finger, let's say, is where the site for the university is located. And again, in terms of the judgment of, this is a new university. It's not an extension to an existing university. It's Ivonne will describe the history of the making of the university, but it's a brand new university and placed in a sliver of land between a busy motorway and a beautiful, quiet, leafy residential area, Barranco. And thinking about that, we saw it as a sort of extension of the cliff, in a sense, because of its proximity and also because of this green finger. Next image. So these were very early sketches of thinking about the cliffs, and the little tiny sketch in the middle is the main motorway, which we felt was really hostile and really loud, and nobody walks along there. It's fast cars. And then on the other side of the site, the leafy Ranco. And so the thing was, how could we make a structure which would mediate between these two extremes? And the bottom right image shows the landscape growing up the face of this cliff, and the top image tries to show the connection between the sea and where our project was going. So these were competition drawings. Next image. And so we started to think about the building as being somewhere between a cliff and being an arena for learning. And the idea of the arena came from really the shape of the site, but also the worry about Lima being seismic and the need for fast escape and lots of staircases and needing to be grounded in the earth. And so we started, when we were looking at sections, we started thinking that it was like a football stadium. So it was somewhere between a football stadium and we looked at Eduardo Sotomayor's football stadium, which is such a beautiful stadium. And we started thinking about the students as being the spectators overlooking the city, to Barranco on one side and the big city on the left-hand side of the sketch, where there's the hostile motorway, and how we could stack the teaching spaces like a kind of big staircases, series of terraces stepping up the site, and that the roof of those teaching spaces could become gardens. And if we go to the next image, we were also thinking about obviously the wonderful terraces of Machu Picchu and other sites in Peru, and how we could take from that. And in a sense, we found an essay written by William Curtis, really interesting, where he talked about platform and horizon. And he talked about Machu Picchu not having the middle ground, so to speak, that there was the intimacy of how people inhabited the landscape, and then there was the breadth of the Andes as a different scale. And we were thinking that this structure could make these intimate classrooms attach themselves to the infrastructure, and that it will make a kind of safe and secure place within the bigger city, and then it would relate to the big horizon. So it was an idea of the intimate and the heroic, let's call it. Next image. And then looking at about the section as it developed, this was still a competition section, and probably one of the things that was really important is that the strategy of integrating landscape into the form was very important in terms of getting permission for this project, because there was a need for a certain area of landscape, And in Lima, we discovered if you make a raised terrace and you're open to the sky, it counts as being outside. So this, I mean, this had to be navigated through the system. But you see the ground hugging lecture theatres and some workshops at the lower level, and car parking going into the basement, and then big workshops exposed like a gallery, so that students could see what was happening and what was being invented. And the spaces get smaller and smaller as you move up the building. In the next image. And we were looking at the light, trying to capture, we were looking at the light of other architects' work and taking from both Brazilian and Peruvian architects' work and the way that you think about the integration of structure with infrastructure, with architecture, and what kind of university could that make? Next image. And the study models of making this three-dimensional, it's like a viaduct or an inhabited infrastructure, and that the climate, a bit like Toulouse, but the climate was such that the prow of this building faces the Pacific Ocean and could tap into the breeze from the Pacific Ocean, but that it's such a moderate climate that the only spaces that we would need to make internal were the teaching spaces, so that the air and the light could flow through the building. Next image. And looking at that in more detail, how we could attach the teaching spaces. So these were very early study models of the way that we were thinking. Next image. And how the landscape could attach itself like crevices, a bit like the cliffs, the way that the planting grabs hold of the earth to grow up of the surface, the sandy surface of the cliff, that maybe we could make something which would feel like that. Next image. And how that might feel as you move through Barranco. And these are all competition. We decided, because you gave us a lot of time and you seemed curious about the way we work, we decided to show you the development of the project and not just the finished. So these are very simplistic in a way you could say, but these are the beginnings of, this is where the project came from. Next image. And then the competition plan, we found it really difficult that we couldn't enter from the road, the main road, and we had to make an entrance through quite a constricted space from the Barranco side. But we loved Medrano Silva. We loved that thing of backing on to the kind of bric-a-brac of city on one side and the bigger world of Lima to the north. And this thing of making an outdoor surface within which all the big elements of the brief could sit, the lecture theatres, the things that don't need so much light, and that they would make this wall a sound screen, a sound acoustic wall to the motorway and relate to the south. Next image. And we took the fog into consideration in thinking about the competition drawings, that the building would disappear into the sky. We were very worried about it, actually, how we could make a building which would feel, which would not suffer from the heat of the intense sun, but wouldn't be too dreary or dull in foggy days, because in Lima, when the fog comes down, it's really grey. But the light, the intensity of the light is so strong that this balance, we think, has been reached. On the next image, we were thinking about the color of the earth and the color of the concrete. And in fact, when we went back to Milan, we discovered that many of the buildings, we had thought of using a pigment to make that kind of lovely yellowy color, but many of the buildings built in the 60s have acquired that, in Lima, have acquired that yellowish tinge because of the wind from the desert and the sand, and it's really nice the way that happens, and the tone of the concrete is softened by the earth. Next image.
And this is a fantastic image of a huaca, and what we find incredible about this this image and these places that are in your city of Lima, that you can still on these pieces kind of feel the fingerprints or see the fingerprints in the modified ground of people long ago, and that the monumentality of the collective individual brick is really stunning. And in terms of people, I think that it's also important for Shelley and I to acknowledge the people that we have met, and like Freddie Cooper from Lima trawled all over the world to try and get as many people to respond to the international competition for this project, and he's a very convincing man. And we did the project, did the competition, and we were unbelievably lucky to win this project. And it's a really important project in our lives, not only for the actual building itself, but also for the people that we have come across in terms of the making of this building. So in terms of the Huaca, to be an architect in a city means that you're more than a tourist, because you're part of the lineage of the making, the actual objects of like a building is an incredibly optimistic collective endeavor, the amount of people. And when we won the competition, it was really interesting. We happened to come across a building in Lima built by the Austrian architectural firm Hans Hollein, and we contacted them to say, what's it like to build in Lima as a foreign architect, because we're aware that we are from another place, and we want to contribute to the culture as opposed to just arrive in with an answer, but more about a strategy. And they recommended a number of people, and we came across them and have worked with Shell Arquitectos, Rafael Shell and Alessandro Shell and Rafael Mistretti, and we have been working with them to make the building. And just the also in terms of local engineers and GCAQ and Carlos Casabon. I mean, just that, just the whole thing of the people involved. So the client, first of all, the competition, the client aspiration for the building, the technology that you have in your country, the ancient histories that are underfoot and very, very beautiful. So these huacas were something that we are learning from, that something so humble and individual put together. It's like a metaphor for the kind of good aspects of human life, that when people put their minds together, so these individual bricks of clay put together to make these monumental terraces, which are unbelievably impressive, these kind of pieces of modified sand or modified clay. And for us, it was also, we were developing an architectural if you like, attitude to saying that architecture is the new geography, because the scale at which since 2008 more than half of the world is a population now live in built rather than kind of wild conditions. And this is real proof of if you like, the continuity of human beings, and some absolutely beautiful things with incredibly modest means to make these beautiful terraces. And also, just after we won the competition, we were invited to participate in the 2012 Architectural Venice Biennale, which was David Chipperfield was the curator, and his theme was common ground. And the common ground could have been interpreted any way. And what we wanted to express in participating in that Biennale was that the common ground of influence, that we had just won the competition for UTEC in Lima. We were looking at places with climates similar to this part of Peru. We had over many years looked at the amazing work of architects in South America, and this section in terms of the stadium, that we were looking at not just the stadium, which is the focus to the football, but also the social interaction that can happen under the umbrella of kind of Mendes de Rocha's structure, that underneath is where people gather as well. So we contacted Mendes de Rocha, whom we did not know, to ask permission to use his, to twin, if you like, our architectural thinking with his work and how his work was really important. And he very generously said, you know, go ahead and do what you like. He was Annette Spiro, who was a Swiss architect who for 15 years had kind of traipsed around South America looking at Mendes de Rocha's work to make a book, introduced us, and he very kindly was unbelievably generous to us. So we did this sketch, and the sketch was trying to synopsize our working together. The line was really the earth. The horizontal lines that go down are really the timber structure that holds the buildings of Venice in the mud of the Adriatic. And then you get the various our islands. And then these two pieces here are Machu Picchu and also Shelley. And I'll explain that now, that these two images, we put them up as part of our exhibition in Venice. And the workmen asked, why are you putting up two images of the same thing? And what is really interesting is that on the left-hand side is the incredible piece of your heritage, which is Machu Picchu. And yet, you know, yes, it is an unbelievable tourist place to go to, but it's also an incredible monument to ingenuity. So you get this mountain, you get the incredible cityscape and carving, as Shelley has described, the intimate terraces, and going back to William Curtis's, the kind of intimate and the majestic. So you have the two scales, there's no intermediate scale. And on the right-hand side, off the coast, so that's the 15th kind of century on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, off the coast of Ireland, is a place called Shelley, which is an island, which is the place of a monastery that survived from about the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries maybe. But it clings, you see these tiny staircases up to these beehive huts made also of dry stone. So this is the same intimacy of the monk cell. So these are hermits, if you like, or a monastery of hermits living, you know, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So it's their little stone sleeping areas and little chapel, the wide horizon of the Atlantic. So between the two countries, you to the Andes and us to the Atlantic, that the similarity, the human, if you like, similarity between how do you modify stone to make a living quarter. And for the 2012 Venice Biennale, as we began the project for the UTEC, these were on the wall. You can see that little hieroglyphic of the line, the foundations and Machu Picchu and the distance. You see the little sketch, the beginning. Also us looking at UTEC on the wall to the same scale as one of Mendes de Rocha's projects. And these large 1 to 20, if you like, imagined ruins, Shelley has used the term for these models, which were us looking at the potential of what UTEC could be, that it was about circulation. These were kind of the embryonic jump from idea into spatial idea. And here we have a range of, it was in the common ground, some of Mendes de Rocha's projects, which we had made this beautiful church of St. Peter's, which we commissioned a sculptor to make in limestone. And it's interesting, she was making the church, and it's the church of Peter, you know, upon this rock I will build my church. And as she built the model, the actual structure of the building held the limestone as well. So even at this miniature scale, the structure of the gravity of Mendes de Rocha's project held true. So we have a whole series of, these are smaller projects of his that we built, models that we made of his work, intertwined with what UTEC was being thought about at the time for us. It's just interesting in terms of students that might be listening. What was interesting is that these were 1 to 20s of concepts that were really just beginning for us to study what the project would be. And also, I think it's important for us to say how much going to visit and standing in amazing buildings resonates in the physical and intellectual kind of memory. This is part of down in La Jolla by Louis Kahn. And what's amazing is the shadow and the carving and the surface. And this is an incredibly beautiful building where you normally are out looking at the setting sun to the west. But there are also these gorgeous carved shadowy spaces that make this precinct for the research scientists. We were also looking, as Shell was describing, some of the drawings that we were looking at, that these incredible structures where inside outside is blurred, and that structure and space and architecture, that structure is liberated to be itself, going back to, say, the London School of Economics, where the big pieces of structure are the places that you stand. You are aware of the structure, that it is the twin of architecture. It is the spatial enclosure. And also things that really helped us over the years, looking at the bravery of this incredible project, you know, by Lina Bobardi, this span, it looks as if it's suspended from the sky. And when we were doing Bocconi University, where the span is 25 or 26 meters, the courage that this person as an architect had to make this public space with a hovering above is part of the treasure of architecture, that all of us can dip into this well that we can dip into to get courage for next projects. And when we then won this amazing competition, when we began then with the fantastic team of local architects, local structural engineers, GCAQ and Carlos Casabon, and a terrific range of people, we were also working with environmental engineers. And these drawings are to look in plan down here, looking at how the sun actually revolves around Lima and the various seasons. What is it like to be to be 12 degrees down from the equator? I mean, you're nearly up at the equator. It's incredible. The sun dances in a certain kind of way. So we were trying to make a vertical campus, but we were also aware that 12 degrees down from the equator is a very hot place to be, or that the sun, how do we make a vertical campus where we would both enjoy a campus for students and professors in the open, but also protect people. So these are the studies of the environmental engineers to protect from solar radiation, to protect, but also to open up, and to, a bit like when Shelley was describing the project in Toulouse, so that we set an outer crust, we're able to carve out the middle in order to make, if you like, a carved mountain in a vertical campus. Okay, Shell. Shell? Oh.
All right. Looking at the final section and the reality of the building, it's in situ concrete combined with some precast concrete walls. We were dealing with the construction industry in Lima, which was really interesting, and we learned a lot, and we discovered that, we knew, but we discovered a very kind of extraordinary fact that the largest users of cement and concrete in Lima are related to domestic houses. and people making their house extensions in concrete, because that doesn't stop. So you have organic cities where they keep continuing to grow up and sideways and outways and backways. And it's a kind of organic world in many of your cities. But here we're using concrete, and it's quite similar to Bocconi in a way. We have something like a 20-meter span between the main staircases, which are the escape stairs, which again form the kind of primary bones or skeleton of the scheme. And then every 10 meters, we have an intermediate scale structure. But one of the things, when you make a project like this, and when we went to visit it, we always expected, if you look at the left-hand side of the section, you see how porous it is. Like those little boxes floating in the air are offices which were designed to act as acoustic barriers between the motorway and the internal vertical space. Now, there were lots of proposals about the quantity of acoustic absorbent material we would use, which changed over time. But anyway, the idea was that these baffles were designed and scientifically modeled to work in terms of control of sound as well as light. But when you see how open it is, and then when one sees the reality of the building, what we found really extraordinary is that we expected the building to feel very porous internally. And when the scaffolding came down and we walked through at ground level, we found that it felt completely solid inside. We never expected that the stepping of the rooms to the north to protect from the sun, which was based on the previous scientific sections that Ivonne has spoken about, that when you're down at the lower level, you don't see the sky. So you feel you're walking in a solid space, even though it's open. And we found that kind of amazing because the client is a mining engineer and mines into mountains and works with geologists, and it really did feel like a piece of carved geology, which really delighted and surprised us. But again, I suppose, how does one navigate from competition stage to final building and hold on to the idea through the whole process? The building changed its height and was reduced and made more compact and more economical, but effectively it kept the spirit of the competition. Next image. And then looking at the plan, we talked about the banana-shaped plan, and you see the 20-meter span every where the staircases happen, and then the intermediate scale. And because we have this shape of site, the thing is that there's no linear axis. You can't see from one end of the building to the other because the walls keep shifting. So that means it feels quite solid, both when you're moving horizontally as well as vertically, which is very different to the Bocconi University, which had a 25-meter span, but is much more rational and orthogonal. And all these different sections you see on the left are what Ivonne calls the DNA of the project, how it keeps changing each time because it's related to the rooms that abut the primary structure. Sometimes it's open, sometimes it's a big room, sometimes it's a little room, sometimes it's a terrace. So it's like an X-ray of the spine of the project. Next image. And then the extraordinary experience of building in Lima, and the scale of the operation and the speed of construction, and the fact that it's so highly organized. And you're supposed to be a third world country, and we found that there were real kind of revelations. Well, first of all, in the brief, there's a theater and there was a cinema, and there was an idea that which happens, that the client, Eduardo Hochschild, has a big art collection, and that would form part of the experience of the building. And at the remember at the opening of the building, there were some really moving descriptions of what a school of engineering should be, that it should include the creative, experimental, artistic approach, as well as the scientific and the rational approach. But the way that the building side, I think there were like 2 or 3 buildings happening in parallel with all the different cranes, and they were moving up in parallel. And we'll look at the program shortly, but it was a program we didn't believe. And the health and safety and the organization was really impressive. Next image. And it was just an extraordinary thing that just took off. And we were so far away. We had Alejandro Shell, architects, looking after this project, and they were brilliant. Ivonne and I would visit for 1 week at a time. But it was like as if this thing took off, and we had to keep up with it. And it had a momentum of its own, and it was really exciting and really impressive. Next image. And just seeing the whole scale of construction, the difficulty of constructing a structure like this, the amount of scaffolding. I mean, it's a kind of, could say it's a kind of crazy project. How could anybody have let us build this building? But it's something that was a really exciting thing to see on being revealed. Next image. And then the spaces that started to emerge. When we visited one particular visit, and the whole scaffolding was down, and we were struck dumb. We couldn't speak. We actually could not speak, and the hair stood at the back of our necks because it just was something else. And it was kind of funny because when the scaffolding came down, we didn't meet our client very much because they had managers and people looking after the project, but we were invited to lunch, and we thought, oh my God, there's trouble here. But what happened was that he was really excited. He could not believe that this happened, even though he had seen it being under construction. And he kept saying to us, how did you do this? How did you think about this? How did you invent it? And that's quite a hard question to answer over a short space of time, but it assumed another kind of life, and it really shocked and surprised us in a good way. Next image. And the program, when we won this competition, which we didn't expect, and we went to Lima to negotiate, we had to say to the client, we didn't really seriously think we were going to win this competition. We're worried about the construction program, we're worried about the construction cost, and we're very worried about the architectural fees, because there's a whole other culture of construction in Peru. But we managed to work out a balance so that we didn't suffer and we could make the contribution we needed to make, and they could get what they wanted. But we genuinely did not believe the program. And when we received the invitation in 2014 for the opening, we thought that that maybe the year is wrong or something, you know, that it's how are they going to do this? But in fact, this did happen. And it was an amazing event. It was also amazing because all the new lecturers traveled to the opening, and the building wasn't actually finished. They were still building on the upper floors, but the opening happened. And Mario Vargas Llosa was one of the guest speakers, and we learned so much about the kind of culture of Lima and the aspirations for this university just during that opening event. But it was a real just the determination to make this university for young engineers of top quality, and the importance that education is held. It's given such an importance within Peru, and how it's seen as the way forward, which it is. Next image. And is this me, Ivonne, still?
Yeah, another few, and then you're
Another few. Okay. Yeah, again, just talking about the workmanship, this folded wall, which forms the base of the project and forms the kind of buttress to resist the noise of the traffic and the danger of the traffic, and it's kind of like a protective wall, was quite complex to make in terms of its three-dimensional quality. And we were really adamant that it would have this folded quality and that there would be a crack at the base where planting could grow and that it would become like a cliff. And we also were quite hard on the contractors at times, and we were very worried about the concrete and how it would feel in the end, and maybe we just keep going and look at it. And at the same time, we found these amazing spaces. We wanted to leave this space as it is. It's the lower, it's the lower level of the theatre space, but this light coming through the concrete. We call these lost spaces that we keep in our portfolio spaces we might make intentionally at some point in the future because we thought it was so beautiful. The next image. And there was one day when we see the difference between the motorway side and the barranco side, and the stepped terraces which are not fully planted yet, and then the kind of bric-a-brac of barranco, which was so important for us to experience, and the proximity of this existing neighborhood and this new university. It's abrupt, but we felt it was it's really important that this institution arrives in this place. Next image. And there was a day when we met with our contractors, and it was at a point when we were becoming more confident about what the final project would feel like. And if we, maybe I'm jumping a number of points at the same time, but if we look at this image and just see how porous it is and how it feels like a very open building from the outside, but if we continue and look at the interior, we might see how the solidity, how it comes to feel really solid within the interior, that when you're in this interior space, that it really feels like you're in a solid space. And we really wanted these classrooms and laboratories to be visible. Sometimes the students move on the motorway side, and sometimes they move quite close to the classroom, so the circulation keeps changing. And as you look along the length of the building, because of the stepping of the site, you don't get a clear axis, or you don't get a clear line of vision, either vertically or horizontally. Next image. And we see the student and this connection with the outside world, which is very like the let's say the image in Toulouse. How does the individual connect with the bigger world, with their own city, with their own place, with their own climate, and not be always within a hermetic interior? Next image. But one of the things we found at one of the site meetings, we had to say to the contractor, look, this is looking really good, and we really compliment you on your work. And it was a great point for us to be able to see this. Now, part of it was because we were getting used to the fact on our visits that the building was quite robust to withstand perhaps misinterpretations of drawings, and there were pipes arriving in places which we never expected them to arrive. And that was quite funny, but it was also quite serious. And in the end, we just found that this is a tough baby, let's say. This will survive, and that was really important. But that also that the contractors, in a very, very short space of time, were so competent, and they were we all became very emotional when we actually were able to say this, you know, this is going to be okay. Next image. And that goes back to some of what Ivonne was saying about part of the experience of building in another place is the people that you meet and the people that you work with. And here you see the sense of this being an open, porous structure. And we know that some people in Lima find this building too tough and too hard. And actually, we've heard people say, well, what is it? Is it a football stadium? And we think that's quite interesting, actually, because we're very interested in the thing of challenging given typologies, that we're not certain that a university has to be a certain way. We're not certain that that universities can't occupy very different kinds of structures. And then from within, when you're looking up, that you don't see the sky and you have this mass of structure, because this is seismic. This is no joke. This building moves and sits on seismic isolators. Next image.
At this point, yeah, so we're just coming to the last section of what we're presenting today. And so you're looking up the valley at the building completed, and time passes. And what is really interesting is that it's important to go back to the fact that this, when it was built, was for a new university. And as time passes, universities then have different requirements. And it's very interesting now that we're involved again with Shell Arquitectos, also again with GCAQ, adding to the second phase of UTEC. And Alvaro Mina is also again the project architect. And what's when Shelley described the site, that in terms of it's about 360 meters long, the motorway. We were entering from here, from the Pacific side, coming in from the motorway. But also there was always an idea that we would that there would be an entrance up here at the other end of the building, at the other end of the site. And what is really interesting now, this red line shows this new entrance that links both the phase one, which is here, we had originally, and it's there, ramps and connections waiting for the next part of the building to be added. So these are the connections. The red lines are the connections, the motorway access, the new building with sports ground, so that the needs are slightly different in terms of the building that has begun. So here we have the new east entrance, which is from here, this wall, this screen, this concrete pencil screens defines the outer point of the site with the playing field. So we have the new eastern gable. You enter, you move along on this entrance ramp, you look down to the playing fields, and you see this new part of the building contained the motorway on the other side, the slip road on the other side. You move along here, tucked in underneath that are changing rooms for this sports. And as you move along onto the plaza, you arrive into this new area. So this plaza is looking at the cafeteria, and you enter into this building. You see students arriving. This is the cafeteria on 2 levels, and you move, you can see the cafeteria, the main entrance. Here you'd move down to the auditorium further down and move up to the various rooms overhead. And here is one of the routes from the east as you move along to connect to phase 1. You're passing by the cafeteria and connecting up to the ramps that exist in phase 1. And this is where students would be fed and meet one another. And there are 2 levels of, there's a terrace up high up in the cafeteria. So in section, what you have is the parking down below. You have the entrance coming along at the upper level, the changing rooms down below, a new plaza, a cafeteria and a fabrication lab in this position, and a library at this level looking towards Barranca and also to the city. So the library is positioned at this part in the more compact phase 2, which is here, a double height space for the library. So students are looking down onto the plaza, but the new plaza, and also out to the city. And at the end, the last piece, and Shelley was describing some of the staircases as they move down onto the to the end before the playing fields into the aula at the end. This is an interior view, a sketch image of that aula, which is arrived at the upper level. You drop down, you have clear story light, which is viewing out to the east. And in terms of the existing phase 1, which is here, that wall that Shelley described, that folding, bending wall, the buttress type space at the base where the motorway is, the new extension as it goes eastward. And the phase 2 then, so that's phase 1, you're looking out to the Pacific, you're looking out to Barranco, you've got the phase, the playing fields, and the new entrance. And we finish on a really important piece of our image from our point of view, which was this beautiful drawing done by Alexander von Humboldt, where he came from Europe and discovered how magnificent and beautiful South America and Peru is. And his drawing, and the reason, I suppose, because especially students now and the time we're in terms of sustainability, that here was von Humboldt categorizing levels, atmosphere, climate, synthesizing. It's called Naturgemälde, which is kind of grouping everything together in terms of we're in this together in terms of sustainability. So for us, this drawing was discovering von Humboldt was really through Peru, through Lima, through the UTEC project, through the pleasure of getting to know your wonderful country. And it was a great honor for us to build and to be building in your country. So from us, thank you, muchas gracias, and in our own native language, Gurif Mahagiv Galer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivonne. Thank you, Shelley, for your really inspiring presentation on your inspiring work. I personally would prefer to say I have no questions in this moment. I have to digest so much. And that's what I mean. No, you have offered us a very rich presentation, rich in how we humans are, how we feel, how we perceive, how we then think, how we learn from others, from the feeling of others, from the perception of others, from the architectures others did, who help us to understand too what we are dealing with. Wonderful that you finished with Alexander von Humboldt, who, well, we consider in Latin America as one who discovered Latin America, who opened the eyes and our own eyes too for what the place is in which we live, and who did this being a global citizen. No, one of the early global citizens, somebody who felt at home everywhere in the world and developed a way of approaching reality, that at the same time was very humble, going directly to what is and seeing what is, what nature is, flora and fauna is, and representing it in such a marvelous way, and allowing us for who all that what astonished Humboldt, no, is so common that we don't see it as what it is. And well, through your work, Ivonne and Shelley, you are, I think, as much Peruvians as Humboldt became in his time. And through you, we have the opportunity of learning about us as we learn from Humboldt and his seeing and his feeling and his understanding. Yes. Allow me, please, to think loudly and bring a kind of structure in the feelings awakened by your presentation, and interrupt me whenever you think you should precise the one or the other thing, because the question is to understand you, to understand your work. It was a very compact presentation. So how to, as humans are, where feelings and perception and thinking is one thing, no, a kind of organ, no, but to speak that as architects we are part of a lineage of a place, to me is a fundamental thought or fact. No, our ego is not so important. If we are self-confident enough, no, we feel that we are one of these earth bricks you showed, no, which all together represented by people from our time, but from people from earlier times too, and maybe from later times. No, we are part of this, of a generation of reality as nature is. First, then you speak always first about the climate. No, your home is the whole world, and you identify climate zones that relates us beyond the frontiers of the different countries, just as humans. Oh, the climate is part of what you are going to propose later. Then there is the thought of architecture as the new geography, as the new topography, no, which is exposed to climate and means a home for plants, for animals, and for people. And then in the next step, it's very significant to me that you always speak about other architects in these places. You speak about Sohn, no? And about Faye Jones, and about the medieval builders. And in relation to Lima, that's very nice to me, very interesting. You speak about Paulo Mendes da Rocha. No? So you speak about architects, no? As you are architects and us are architects, and we see the world as architects, and we see the world through the eyes of other architects. That is through the works of other architects, which reveal us what they saw. So to me, this is fundamental for us in Lima to understand. We have this climate. No, to be in a desert, is it good or is it bad? No, it is as it is. Are we in the valley or in the desert? Well, in every place we are where we are. No? And the climate is what it is. And if it's foggy and it's unfortunately not the blue sky of Corbusier, no, then, well, that's a fact in this place. No, and the question is how to deal with that architecturally, as you intend to do. No, as you propose a way of doing. No, and our topography is not just by coincidence as it is with these cliffs. These cliffs we haven't seen for a while in Lima. We had to rediscover recently, no, the last decades of the 20th century. No, that they are so strong and they are so inspiring. No, and these are not just words, but your proposal for Lima is a demonstration of this. No, and how your UTEC is related to the DNA of the Lima landscape in this area, and is a kind of transformation of the natural DNA into an urban DNA, which magnifies, it's another word by you, no? What was there? Is all of this correct? Yvonne, Shelley?
Oh, it's just incredible to hear your words, Manuel. I'm very moved, actually. So the silence is as a human being, I find it very touching, actually. So excuse me, I'm moved by your words, and I think that
could you keep talking there, Manuel?
Yeah.
Enjoying.
Well, I moved to, frankly, I moved to, no. Well, we are going to work about all this with our students, and well, you are through your work formulating challenges too, no? And I would say human challenges, cultural challenges, no, to find a way to be oneself, as you found a way, no, as Irish colleagues being limeñas in the moment, being part of the lineage of this place.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. And that is something we Peruvians, or us Peruvians, I think is our challenge to understand that we are not in an exceptional situation for the good or for the best, but in the situation humans are wherever they are, and that they are not good. There are no good places and bad places, but only the places where we are. Mm-hmm. And that architecture is possible in every place. Understanding this, no, it's not a question of our heads. It's a question of our humanity, of being humans and understanding us as part of the lineage.
Mm. Mm. No, that's wonderful, Manuel. It's lovely to hear you speak. I see Shane there. I'm sure you're showing your face for a reason, Shane.
I appreciated very much the selection of the works you presented us. No? London, urban context, Arkansas in the US, Toulouse, France, Middle Ages, and then UTEC. excellent situation, different places, completely different places, and different results, different architectural results, but children of the same feeling and perceiving and thinking and projecting, designing.
It came from your questions, Manuel, because as Shelley said in the very beginning, when we read, your questions, we wanted to have a kind of a range that's not about a style of architecture, but about value system. How do young architects begin? And what we really, like when you think of the food from Peru, which is the world top food, from the differences, even within your own country, the ocean, the mountain, the jungle, that each of these places have it's not just nature, we are natural creatures. So the architecture as the new geography, it's like as if what is interesting about and in terms of sustainability, which is a global crisis, it's also an opportunity to say each place. What really struck us, I suppose, was that here's a place where it doesn't get really very, very hot and it doesn't get really, really very cold. So it's a real opportunity to say, right, it's unique, that you could make something that's more about shelter or platforms for living. And as Shell described, that we would only enclose spaces in that really needed to be enclosed, but otherwise, and it came from conversations, as Shell was describing, someone who had spent time with you and came back and said how friendly and open the people are, and that people sit around and talk outside, and that Peruvians enjoy each other's company, that architecture, should celebrate that kind of phenomenon, and you have the climate to be inside and outside, and you're not living in Alaska, whereas if you stay outside, you're dead because the temperature has dropped below a certain amount. The temperature and climate makes a certain personality for a people as well. And that it's very beautiful, the words you talk about in terms of climate. And we were trying to respond to your questions so that it's a state of mind. And so that the research, that architecture has the capacity to find a culture or look for a cultural component, because the pressure of the media is to be, to make the glassy thing, to make the thing, and to do, to go down certain routes image-wise. And really what I suppose the fantastic thing about architecture is that it can begin again. Each project is a beginning again. And sometimes there are samples that are very useful. I mean, we often look at a 15th century building in Milan, which is still in use because it's a series of courtyards, nice cloisters, nice staircases that you're open, and it still does the job. Now that is sustainability. The investment in the 1400s that's still in 2023 doing its job. That in terms of a building is success and sustainability in materials.
You mentioned Peruvian cuisine, Peruvian gastronomy, Ivonne, which is leading in the world. Yes. And well, it is associated to popular cooking. No, this high cuisine, is not the product of high cuisine, but of popular cooking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it comes from, how do you say, from the bottom to the upper.
Yeah.
No, it grows like a plant from the social roots, no, from the cooking of the poor, who had to eat whatever was cheap,
Mm.
and who had to make miracles, no, to to be able to enjoy, no, the pieces that the elites didn't want. So that's the way of Peruvian cuisine. And if Peruvians are so good in elite cooking, no, it's because Peruvians are good eaters. Then they are good cooks. No?
Yeah.
We appreciate the foods, and that's the basis, no, for being good in cooking. So what is the situation in architecture? No, if
the same. It's the same.
Well, but one could say, but what do Ivonne and Shelley know about Peru and about Lima? And they come here, no? And if they do not have roots here, no, how can they produce an architecture here, so far away from Ireland, no? Which has this essence, no, of being the result of the local roots.
Well, we were speaking about this morning at another meeting, and one of the things we were saying is that, you know, we worked in Ireland for 25 years before we ever did a project outside of Ireland, and in some ways, you know, learning about your own place and having to refresh your own tradition and reinterpret your own tradition is also extremely challenging, because you're familiar with it and you have to stand beyond the familiar. And we love the way Rafael Moneo talks about bringing your own city with you, knowing your own city and bringing it with you. And I think what he means is that if you can read your own place or your own language in a way which allows you or equips you to refresh that language, you can do this in other places, actually. So the local and the global are quite connected. They're not necessarily contradictory, but one needs to be grounded in something, grounded your feet around on certain ground, and that grounding is the thing that allows you to see other places afresh, because they're different. You say, my God, it's so different. I think one of the biggest revelations for me in Lima was the Huaca. I could not believe that there were monuments made collectively, not by a huge, well, maybe it was a huge authoritarian power, but that people would come together and make bricks and make these places which have an incredible presence, but don't feel oppressive. They're not about power. We've never seen a place like that it's about the collective, that the collective, you know, and Ivonne talked about you could see the handprints on the bricks, that this could make structures like this. It's still extraordinary. We have to go back and read because we keep not believing that it has happened, and we still don't understand the Huaca. But we were just completely amazed by it, that it's a man-made landscape, not a man-made object. It's a man-made landscape. And why do they do that? And why do they do it like this? But what it taught us is that the monumental does not have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be an impositional thing. Maybe it's like the food, that it comes from the stomach of the people or something.
You just remind me also, Shell, when you're speaking, that in the Sir John Soane Museum, in his collection of, you know, amazing pieces from Greece and whatever, he also has a piece from Peru. And what is really interesting for us was that Freddie Cooper recommended an exhibition that was on in Peru in one of the visits. And what was incredible was in ancient pottery, the spatial description and the humanity. You know, there'll be somebody lying on a kind of a bench with his toes curled up or something, that the observation for detail of humanity, that don't underestimate the warmth that both Shelley and I experienced and still experience with our colleagues in Peru, that the humanity of you as a people is palpable. You know, you really feel the genuine warmth of interaction, and the artwork of ancient artwork. These little cubes of we actually did, based on some of those beautiful pieces made in that exhibition, made and exhibited in that exhibition. We did a small thing in Barcelona a number of years ago, and working with students, we got them to make these cubes of space based on the Peruvian pottery, which were to describe what they had been dealing with. So it goes two ways as well. We're enriched by the experience of Peru. We're enriched by your generosity, by the fact that we have the privilege to be connected to your country. And that's why we have the first image with us out in the Atlantic and you out in the Pacific, that we share the globe, and we, especially I suppose in time of war and whatever, especially here in Europe, that you realize that architecture is such a collectively positive thing, people working together to make something, that it's, you know, the amount of people, if you stood them all in, Michelle had the image of there were 900 workmen in orange suits building the building. 900. That's like something in, you know, building one of the medieval cathedrals. And they were incredibly sophisticated people translating an idea into form. And I think for architects, probably, you know, it's such an optimistic profession, because so many people come together to make something positive, and it's all undone by sadness of war when you see buildings destroyed. So the spectrum of positivity in the building of whatever it is, whether it's a tiny thing or a big thing, is such a privileged profession to be trained as architects, to be part of the possibility of making a future reality, and just the workmen, all the names of people we'll never know, the lists of, you know, anonymous carpenters and people. It's a huge collective endeavor, it's a wonderful part of life, that things are made.
It was lovely walking around the building site where you'd see where the guys would sleep, where they would take a rest, and they all found fantastic corners where they could lie out and put their head on a concrete block or something, but be in the shade. It was, you know, it was the way that cats sit in the sun or something, you know. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing with us this experience and these values and this thinking and this. No, my question, of course, was rhetoric, and it was more directed to us Peruvians. No? As professionals, we used to be part of the elites. No? So are we obliged, or are we necessarily elitarian in our work? No? Or is it enough to understand, no, how the real direction of growth of culture and of architecture is, no, to be able to serve doing what the place and the moment and the people require? No? And I think you have shown us that this works. It's not just a fantasy, no, but a reality. No? Learning to see what reality is and is there, and well, is part of us and us part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shelley.
Thank you.
For your work, for the work done in the past, for the work you are doing now, preparing the basis for a next meeting here with our Peruvian students.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't know if Shane wants to come for a next conversation with me, but to you and to our audience, I say many thanks. Many thanks for being Peruvian with us through your contribution to our Peruvian lineage. Thank you, Ivonne. Thank you, Shelley.
Our pleasure.
It's a pleasure to hear you speak. The way you speak about architecture is a real pleasure. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.